Welcome to Literary AF Podcast.
Bonjour!
Oh, no.
No, as we're talking about a French book, I have to do the voice.
Oh, okay.
Bonjour and bienvenue. Welcome to Literary AF Podcast. I'm Sheldon.
I'm Danny.
And we're here today to talk to you about books.
Yep.
One book in particular. Actually, half a book
Half
in
a book.
particular.
Half a book.
We're talking about my favorite book of all time, which is Les Miserables.
My
by
favorite musical.
Victor Hugo. Very good. We're actually going to talk a lot about the musical and how it fits.
Sure.
But the book is very long.
Yep.
Well,
I haven't read it.
But it's very good. I have an abridged copy that's still almost 900 pages.
Yeah, that's insane.
And there are whole sections that are just cut right out of the story where it'll just sum it up in like a one-page thing. Like, here, I'm just going to find it right now because I know exactly where it is. So, in book 2, because it's split up into 5 little books, in book 2, the first chapter is just a little paragraph in italics that says, Hugo describes visiting the battlefield of Waterloo in Belgium in 1861. There the English had defeated Napoleon. So it's just basically a history lesson. And then the next chapter is chapter 2 in my book, but it's chapter 19 of the original book. Meaning that Hugo spent 19 chapters describing himself walking through a battlefield.
Oh boy. Is there like an abridged version of the abridged version?
No, the abridged version I have is very good because like he sums up all those chapters with one paragraph, and the only like real story pertinent detail that you need to know is that Thénardier was there and he robbed a man named Colonel Pontmercy, who ends up being Marius' father.
Okay.
So like you find out everything you need to know in a very short space.
Right.
But then the chapters that have actual important characters or plot related things are done in mostly full.
Okay.
So the book starts. So yes, like I said, it's made up of 5 books. We're going to talk about the first 2 today. The first book is called Fantine. You'll never guess which character features prominently in this book. The book starts with talking about the bishop. In the musical, the bishop has like one moment in like this first song, or no, the second song. But it starts with the bishop and kind of his history. He's the book is very religious, like it's very like takes a very religious stance on a lot of things.
Right.
But it's kind of like it makes it clear that like a lot of church people are like greedy, like the church is very greedy, or like that kind of thing. But not the bishop in this book. The bishop is like good man. He's like gives all of his money to the poor. He's like very like lives off of nothing basically. It goes into detail like how he visits his region and how like he basically like uses the greediness of the other bishops to get more money to give to the poor.
Okay.
So like the other bishops refuse to walk anywhere, so they hire carriages. So then he goes to the like head of the church and demands that he has his carriage money. And then once he gets it, he gives it to the poor.
Okay.
So it's like, he's a fun little character. His name is Monsieur Myriel, but his middle name is Bienvenue. And so everyone just calls him Mr. Bienvenue, which is Mr. Welcome? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it goes through his kind of bit. He's got 2 little nuns working with him, and they're kind of funny. He talks to some people that nobody else talks to. There's one guy who is like loyal to Napoleon. This book takes place. I don't know a lot about French history. And I just like really for Napoleon, I just know he was like a war kind of general guy, who like led France for a while and was like kind of like conquesting all of Europe, but then died and he was short. That's all I know about Napoleon.
He actually apparently wasn't very short. That was just like propaganda.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Probably English propaganda, those Brits. But anyway, so apparently, this book takes place after Napoleon, which I think is after the original French Revolution. It starts in like 1815 or 1820 or something like that.
Right.
And there's this guy who's loyal to Napoleon. Nobody else in the town will talk to him. The bishop goes and talks to him and has like a moment. After that comes, you skip to a man named Jean Valjean, who is a prisoner being released from the galleys. He served 19 years for stealing a loaf of bread. Well, 5 years for stealing a loaf of bread, and then
the rest for trying to run away.
The rest because he kept trying to escape.
Yeah.
And it kind of says like, you know, like he was like worked as like a fruit pruner or something, and he lived with his sister who had like 5 kids or 8 kids or something like that, and so he was the lone like provider for the family, and they were like cutting back at his work or something, like he wasn't able to get enough money to support them. So then one day he broke into the baker's house and tried to steal a loaf of bread, but then he got caught, and instead of, I can't remember, it's something really silly, but basically like because he broke the window, it was counted as break and entering, and because he was caught with the loaf of bread in his hands, it was like breaking and stealing, which elevated it from like a misdemeanor to like a felony or whatever the French equivalent is.
Okay.
So then he went to the galleys, which is like a chain gang, like breaking rocks or whatever.
Pulling in big ships with rope.
That's what it is in the movie.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that does happen later in the book.
Okay.
But maybe that's what he was doing at the beginning too. And then yeah, he tries to run a few times. It goes through like how he's very strong, how he like can lift a thing with only his back.
You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah, that's right. All those. Well, it was the 1800s. They didn't know better. But yeah, he's like, they called him like the human jack because he could get underneath something and then just lift it up. He could climb walls without like, if he got himself into a corner, he could just like scale the wall that way. Just by pressing his back really hard up against the wall.
What?
And, like, yeah, I don't know. Doesn't describe it super well.
Like, if, like, a right-angled corner, he just, like, creeps up the wall using his back? Or...
Yeah, like, just creeps up the wall by pressing really hard against both sides. So he's, like, kind of like, I don't know, creeps his way up there.
Okay.
He's a strong man.
Alright, sure.
It just kind of goes into detail about how strong he is, how good he is at doing that kind of stuff. But then he gets released, and he's given a yellow passport, which he has to show at every town he shows up at, basically just saying he's a convict. So he can't find work anywhere. The first town he goes to, he starts working, but he doesn't show his passport right away. And then at the end of the day, the workman, or like the foreman at the site, gives everybody their pay, which is like 30 sous, which I think is like, I don't know French equivalent currency rates. But so they give everybody 30 sous, and then they give Jean Valjean like 10. And then he's like, this isn't fair. And they're like, well, you got a yellow passport, so deal with it, buddy. And then they kick him out of town, so he moves on. He gets to a town where they won't let him stay at the inn. He's like, well, I have a little bit of money. And they're like, doesn't matter. There's no room. You can't stay here. And he's like, well, at least give me some food and let me sleep in the stable. And they're like, nope, get out. And so he walks around the town. He tries to stay a few different places. They all kick him out. Finally, he runs into a random lady in the street who points him towards the bishop's house. He goes to the bishop's house, spends the night, and the bishop is the first man to treat him like with any dignity the whole time since he's been released, and actually probably when he was in prison the entire time. So he like immediately is kind of confused by the bishop, and then, but his like he still has like the instincts of a criminal, so he sees the silver and is like, okay, I'm just gonna take it and run,
right?
Because I can at least sell this. He takes silver. Caught immediately, brought back.
Right.
The bishop is like, oh, my friend, I gave you those as a gift. And Jean Valjean doesn't like really know what to say at all. He just is like completely dumbfounded. And then the bishop also gives him the silver plates as well. It's like, oh, you forgot this. And so Jean Valjean is like, well, I don't know what to think about this. He walks away like in a stupor. And then as he's walking down the road, a little chimney sweep, drops a coin that he was like flipping on his hand, and Jean Valjean puts his foot over the coin, and then won't give it back to the kid, and then like he's kind of like still like in the criminal mindset where he's like stealing from this kid, but also he's like wrestling with what just happened with the bishop, So he doesn't like say anything. He just doesn't move his leg, and the kid freaks out. And eventually, the kid runs away crying because this big, strong galley slave stole his money.
Yeah.
And then Jean Valjean like finally processes everything like hours later, and then runs looking for the child to give him back his money, but can't find him, and decides that he's like an evil man and needs to be like redeemed. And that's when he has his big like God moment or whatever on the road.
Right.
So that's kind of his start. Then it switches over to a young lady named Fantine, or Fantine, I don't know, whatever you want to call her. She is working in the city. She's like young and beautiful. She has very nice teeth and very blonde hair. That's how she's described.
Okay.
She meets this guy who is a total D-bag. He is like mid-30s and she's like early 20s or like late teens.
Okay.
She's dating this guy. He's like losing his teeth. He's got a receding hairline. He's like a pompous jerk, but he's like kind of like lower upper class kind of thing where he's like sort of important. Just important enough to like for the like people to notice him.
Yeah.
And so Fantine's dating him, and she has a bunch of other friends who are dating his friends, and they're all going out in the town together having all this fun.
Right.
The book kind of makes it clear like the rest of the girls are just like, or actually the rest of the group are just kind of in it for like a lark, like, oh, this is just a summer fling, whatever. Yeah. But Fantine's like deeply in love with this loser.
Right.
And so they're kind of going on. They have one big day together, and it's kind of like talking about like them going through Paris and having these like indulgent adventures, and the guys are buying them like this fancy meal and stuff. Mm-hmm. But the men keep saying they have a surprise for the girls. Mm-hmm. And the girls are very excited because they think they're going to get like a big gift. Fantine's just excited because she gets to be with like her love. And then the guys decide to blindfold the girls to give them their big surprise. I think it's a blindfold. I can't remember. But anyway, the guys are like, just wait, we'll be back with your surprise.
Uh-oh.
And the guys just leave.
Oh, no.
They leave them in the middle of this fancy restaurant, eating a meal that's not paid for.
Oh, no.
Just abandon them there.
Aw.
And so the rest of the girls were like, oh, those guys were bums. I knew it, blah, blah, blah. Or like, the one girl's like, I met a new man anyway. I was looking for a way to break it off with him.
Right.
And Fantine's like, I had a baby from that guy. So Fantine and her young baby, who were just abandoned.
Yep.
First, she tries to write some letters to the guy, and the guy like doesn't respond at all.
Well, yeah, of course.
She can't get a hold of him whatsoever.
Right.
So then, and the guys too. They left because their parents were like bugging them to make something of their lives. So they're like, well, our parents are bugging us all the time to go back home, and these girls are always bugging us for a surprise. So wouldn't it be perfect if we just
surprise
the girls by leaving?
Oh no.
But yeah, so anyway, so she can't get back hold of him at all.
Right.
So then with her job, she can't raise a baby on her own in the city.
Yeah.
So she decides she's going to head back to her hometown, a little place called M, which I always call Mont-sur-Mont. I don't know why. But anyway, she goes back to Mont-sur-Mont, and it's just in the book, it's like M blank, Sir M blank.
Okay.
So I just call it Mont-sur-Mont. Which would be Mountain of Mountain, I think, if I know my French.
Well, I mean, Jean Valjean's name is like just John.
You know, that's right.
Yeah.
It's probably because of Jean Valjean.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mon Valmont, or no, she goes to her town, and on the way, she meets a 30-ish, 40-ish type lady who has two young, beautiful baby girls on her lap. And she's like, oh, look how happy those children are. They're playing well. And then the lady's like, oh, what of it? She's described as being red-haired and red-faced and kind of a giant. And very cruel and crude, but she's like with her babies, so she's like, seems happy for the moment. Mm-hmm. And her name is Madame Thénardier. And so Fantine sees that she has these two babies and is like, wow, you're really good with kids and you own this tavern? She's like, yeah, me and my husband. And then she's like, is there any way you could look after my kid? And then the mom was like, no, get out of here. But then Thénardier was like listening from the other room and was like, "Yeah, we can if you pay us money," because Thénardier is like very cutthroat and very like he'll do anything for cash kind of thing.
Well, they have 2 kids in this one?
Yeah, they had Eponine and she had a little sister named Zelma.
Okay.
They also have many more children that they ignore completely.
Okay.
They have one son named Gavroche.
Oh.
Who shows up later.
Really?
Yeah, that's their son who they completely ignore.
Yeah, okay.
Like he lives on the street because his parents don't have time for him.
Okay, yeah, they skip that entirely in the movie.
In the book, or at least in the first 2 books, he's mentioned as like being a baby who's left upstairs to cry alone.
Right.
And is never comforted.
Okay.
But anyway, so Fantine leaves Cosette there for a total of like, I want to say 6 francs a month or something. I don't know. I'm probably gonna get the currency wrong and the amounts wrong.
Oh no, those are correct. Sous and franc are the right word. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I can't remember though if she had to pay like 15 sous a month or if she had to pay 6 francs a month or something like that. But whatever. She left him there for a certain amount of month, and then she goes to the town where she was. In the time that she's been gone, a man came there, became the mayor. They won't tell us any details about the mayor other than that he's like he had this idea, so first he comes as a worker, and then he had this idea to like, the town is famous for like their little like trinkets and necklaces and stuff, and he was like, if you bend the thing instead of having to weld the metal, it still holds and it will save us however much money a month. And so basically he like revolutionized the process by having like these like small little ideas that like save the company money or whatever, save the factory money. And so he ended up becoming like basically becoming leader of the factory. He's making lots of money. He was sort of rich. Eventually he was made mayor because the whole town was profiting off of his good ideas. And they were like demanding that he be made mayor, and he didn't want to. He was kind of like an enigma around the town. Nobody knew much about him. It's clearly Jean Valjean, but the author will not mention that it's Jean Valjean.
Right.
He's just Monsieur Madeleine, and he's the mayor. There's a cop in town whose name is Javert. Javert is the only person in town who doesn't like the mayor. Well, actually, there's a few who don't like Monsieur Madeleine, but Javert is the only one who's like of importance that doesn't like him.
I pulled up a 19th century French currency webpage, and they're actually talking about Les Mis on the webpage.
Perfect.
1 franc is 100 centimes.
Okay.
1 sou is a 20th of a franc, equal to 5 centimes.
Okay, so 5 sous would be 1 franc.
No, 20 sous would be a franc.
Oh, okay.
1 sou is a 20th of a franc.
Oh, I thought I did the math backwards.
1 British pound sterling is about 25 francs.
Oh, okay.
At that time.
All right, so you had heard it here, folks. I don't know basic math. No. So then Fantine comes. She's working at the factory, or she gets a job at the factory. She doesn't tell anyone that she has a kid. The mayor, he has the factory divided into a man's side and a woman's side because he doesn't want the men like taking inappropriate advantage of the women.
Should have been looking at his foreman.
Well, in the movie, the foreman is a man. In the book, the foreman is a woman.
Oh.
But she finds out about the baby and is like, this woman had a child out of wedlock. That's what the twist is.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
Than the man.
And because they're so separated, Jean Valjean doesn't pay attention to what happens in the woman's side.
Right.
He only knows about what the foreman tells him.
Right.
So.
You see, yeah, that makes more sense. Because in the movie, the foreman's a man.
Yeah.
And he finds out she has a kid, and he's like, oh no, you've slept with someone.
Yeah, you hussy.
Even though I'm clearly trying to sleep with you.
Yeah.
How dare you? And then he kicks her out. That never made a lot of sense to me, so.
Yeah, it's like a staunchy religious lady who's like,
okay,
this woman is a sinner.
That makes way more sense.
Yeah. So she works at the factory. If you've seen the movie, that song where Fantine goes from being like a respectable factory worker to a prostitute is the good chunk of this first book. And it is very sad, I can assure you.
The I Dreamed a Dream segment?
The I Dreamed a Dream segment. Oh,
yeah.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll be able to find it just offhand, but there is one certain section where she talks about like her becoming poor.
Right.
And she basically, so while this is all happening, so she gets a job. She's making good money at first. The Thénardiers start asking for more money. They say, "Oh, Cosette's sick. We need more money." Mm-hmm. Oh, did I say her daughter's name was Cosette? If I didn't say it before, I'll say it now. Her daughter is Cosette.
Yes, you might have.
Okay, I don't remember.
I don't remember anymore.
So they say, "Okay, we'll send." She says, "Fine, I'll send her more money." It goes from like 6 francs a month to like 8 francs a month or something, and then they demand extra because of the sickness, so they need to send money for medicine. Mm-hmm. And then she ends up losing her job because these letters are found saying that she has a child. Mm-hmm. And then the mayor doesn't care. The mayor doesn't notice. In the meantime, a man whose name is Fauchelevent. He falls down underneath his horse cart, and the horse dies, and he can't get out of his cart.
Okay.
And then Jean Valjean is like, "Can anyone come? We need to lift this cart to get this man out of here."
So this also seemed like a really random thing in the movie.
Yeah.
Just this cart fell on a guy. Oh no.
Yeah. So like, it's in a chapter where Jean Valjean's helping a lot of people.
Right.
But this part is very important for like story wise. He's helping a lot of people. And then this happens. Nobody will come to the guy's aid. They're like, "Oh, we sent for somebody, but it's gonna be 15 minutes or something." Mm-hmm. And then he's like, "Well, if this guy doesn't get help now, he's going to die."
Right.
And I guess the road is super muddy, so it's like slowly sinking even deeper.
Right.
And the like axle of the vehicle's like crushing the guy's chest.
Right.
And then Javert's like, "Well, I only knew about one guy who was strong enough to lift this with his back, and he was from the prison." And then Jean Valjean's like, "Ugh." Well, so he waits. Nobody can help. Finally, he decides he just has to go in there and save this man.
Yeah.
He saves old Fauchelevent, and then because Fauchelevent's like a cripple now, Jean Valjean is able to get him a job at a convent in Paris, mm-hmm. which will come up again later. And Javert sees this, and Javert's like, "Okay, now this mayor who I'm already suspicious of, who already kind of remind me of that galley slave, is now like very suspicious." So Javert decides to like write to his superiors.
Cut to that gif of Javert looking sad out the window.
Yeah. Actually, I don't know. He doesn't write to his superiors yet. He's just now he's like on the scent of Jean Valjean. Now he's like, "I think I know who you are."
Right.
Then Fantine is she gets fired from her job. She is now working. She sews clothes that she sells to the soldiers, and she gets like 15 sous a day, which, like we said, was like a 1/20 of a dollar.
1 sou is a 1/20 of a franc. And 25 francs was a British pound.
Okay, so she's making almost $1 a day. Mm-hmm. And then, so she's living off of nothing. There's a whole section where it like talks about like how the extremely poor like make it like an art of like surviving, where it's like, oh, they don't need to light their candle at night. They just keep their window open, and the guy next door's candle sheds a bit of light into their room. And like, it's very sad, but it's like, yeah. I don't know, I enjoy it. And then the one section I really love is she says, "After I send all this money for the Thénardiers to look after Cosette, I'm only left with a couple sous a month. That's enough to buy bread, and I don't need to eat that much anyway since something about anxiety." She's like, "The poorer I am, the more anxiety I feel, and the more anxiety I feel, the less I need to eat. The less
hungry I am?"
Yeah.
Oh.
So she's like, "I'm living off of bread and anxiety."
Aw.
And so that happens, and then
Same.
They say that, yes, I related strongly to bread and anxiety. But then the Thénardier sent another letter saying, "Cosette is very sick, and if you don't send us medicine right away, she's going to die." Mm-hmm. In truth, it was the Thénardier's kid. It was Éponine who was very sick.
Okay.
And they actually, they loved Éponine. They were taking care of Éponine. So they wanted the money for Éponine's medicine. Mm-hmm. So then Fantine didn't know what to do. She was still beautiful, but very poor. Mm-hmm. And then somebody in town was like, "Oh, your hair is very beautiful. They'd pay good money for your hair." So then she's like, "Fine, I'll shave it off and I'll sell my hair as a wig."
Yeah.
And so that's how she makes the first money. Then all of a sudden there's a new problem. I can't remember what the second problem was, but something new with Cosette. And if she didn't send the money right away, the Thénardiers would be forced to sell her into slave labor.
Oh.
That's what they say.
Oh, no.
So then Fantine's like, "Okay, I got to find a way to make more money."
Yeah.
And then somebody was like, a dentist was like, "You know, they will take your teeth to use as fake teeth because you have such like beautiful, like pearly white teeth.
Yeah.
And then Fantine's like, well, I don't want to give up my teeth. And they're like, oh, we just need all the ones in the front. So in the movie, they don't take the front teeth because then Anne Hathaway would have looked...
She would never have been able to sing her song.
Yeah. But in the book, they only take the front teeth.
Oh, no.
So she's like this weird, hairless, toothless creature.
Right.
Who'll still do anything for a daughter. Then the soldiers decide, or then the like government decides that the soldiers can no longer buy these special clothing from her or something.
Mm-hmm.
They like pass like a rule, but then it ends up just like really screwing over this poor woman.
Yeah.
So then that's how she gets into the prostitution thing.
Right.
They don't go deeply into that. They just kind of mention that that's what she does.
Right.
And then some dude in the park is like making fun of her one day. And then he decides to take a handful of snow and shove it down her dress.
Yeah.
And she like turns around and claws his face. And then Javert's like, oh, prostitute attacking a citizen. That means the prostitute's going to jail.
Yeah.
And so he takes her away. And then the mayor shows up and he was like, I heard from other people that this guy kind of started it. I don't think this woman should be going to jail. She needs a warm bed. She doesn't need a prison cell. And then Javert's like, get out of here. This girl broke the law. She deserves it.
Mm-hmm.
Fantine spits in Jean Valjean's face because she thinks that he's the reason why she lost her job. And then Javert's like, oh, spit in the face of the mayor. Now you're going to the gallows. And Jean Valjean's like, no, she's fine. Like, blah, blah, blah. And Javert is so, like, upset by this because it's, like, a clear, like, I don't know. Like, it goes against law and order, and that's all he's about.
Yeah.
So he is so upset about this. He doesn't know what to do. He ends up writing to his superiors that he thinks the mayor of the town is, like, a former convict, or, like, he's a convict and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And tries to get Jean Valjean in trouble. Meanwhile, Jean Valjean decides to put the woman in the hospital at his expense. She doesn't know what's happening. Fantine has been kind of getting sicker as she's been poor,
mm-hmm.
but then the snow like woken up the infection in her chest and it starts like spreading really rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
So then she's in this bed trying to recover. She starts to see the mayor as like this holy angel who's been sent to protect her. Then Javert comes back and is like, I need to ask you a favor to the mayor. And the mayor's like, oh, what is it? And then he's like, I thought you were a convict, so I wrote to my superiors, but then they just let me know that the real Jean Valjean has just been arrested, and basically I flaunted my authority, or I went against your authority, so I should be dismissed from my job. And then Jean Valjean's like, well, no, I'm not going to fire you.
Technically, he was correct.
He was correct, but he was also like, I'm not going to fire you for that. You should get back to work. And then Javert's like, no, you need to fire me. I messed up. And then he's like, you just made a mistake. And then he's like, no, I went against authority, and that's bad. So Javert has a meltdown. And then Jean Valjean is just like trying to get him out of the room because he's like rocked by this news.
Mm-hmm.
And then he finds out that there is this guy who's being put on trial who looks exactly like Jean Valjean. It's been confirmed by like former friends of his from the galleys.
Yeah.
And the real Jean Valjean's like, well, I don't know what to do. Is this God like providing a way for me to live as the mayor peacefully for the rest of my life?
Mm.
And then he's like, well, no, God wouldn't want me to condemn this innocent man to prison when I could save him by my actions. And he's going back and forth on it a lot. It's the who am I scene from the musical.
Who am I?
And in the meantime, Fantine's getting way sicker.
Yeah.
He's visiting her every day, and then she's like, all she wants is to see her daughter. So he's trying to like arrange a way to go find the daughter. But he's also trying to figure out what to do with this court case.
Mm-hmm.
Javert announced that he's going there to testify, and then he's leaving his post. And Jean Valjean's like, okay, well, what day is the court, the trial? And he's like, well, it's tomorrow. I'm going tomorrow. And so then Jean Valjean ends up finding a way. He gets to the trial. It's like he thinks he's late. And there's like this whole section where it's like, I'm late. That means God doesn't want me to go. And then some kid will pop up and be like, well, sir, I could sell you a horse and you'd get there on time. And he'd be like, curses. That's like a whole long section.
Yeah.
He finally makes it there. It has like this melodramatic section where he's watching the trial and he's so shocked by it that his hair instantly turns white.
What?
Yeah.
Oh.
That's like apparently that's a common melodramatic device.
Just a shock of white hair
books.
instantly.
Yeah.
Huh.
He sits through the whole trial. the guy doesn't know what to say. He's like an uneducated farmer, and he's like, his only defense is like, I tell you, I'm not that man. And that's like it. And he keeps like looking at the judge like, well, I'm not the guy. So they're like, it looks pretty clear that they're going to convict him of this crime and throw him back in the galleys. And then so Jean Valjean stands up and says, I'm the real Jean Valjean. He asks the like galley slaves some questions that only the real Jean Valjean would know. And then they're like, oh, wow, this mayor is the real Jean Valjean. And everyone's too shocked to arrest him immediately. So he's like, right, so I'm going to go home and deal with a couple things quick. You guys know where to find me. Peace.
That's always seemed like that part of the movie always made like very little sense.
Well, because Javert's not there.
Yeah.
And if Javert was there, he would have arrested him instantly.
Yeah.
So
he's just like, I'm the criminal, you want to arrest me, and then he walks away, and everybody's like, Monsieur le Maire, wait.
In the book they think he's like that the mayor has gone slightly crazy, or that he's having like a hysterical episode.
Yeah.
So they like don't know what to do at first, and then they like the prosecutor like confirms a few things, and is like, oh, he is the criminal. We should go for him.
Yeah.
So he goes back to town. He meets Fantine again. And she's like, oh, you brought Cosette. I can hear her playing outside. And it was just like another random kid.
Mm-hmm.
But they're like, don't tell her it's not, because she's on the like verge of death.
Yeah.
And if she gets bad news right now, it won't be good for her.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, yes, I brought you your daughter, but you can't see her right now. You need to be calm and rest, and you'll see her soon. And then, so he's like, okay, I have to go save her. But then before he can leave, Javert shows up, and Javert's like, haha, I knew it was you. You're arrested. And Jean Valjean's like, no, let me just go save this woman's daughter, and then I promise you can take me in. And he's like, promise, you're a convict. I don't trust you. Haha. So then he arrests Jean Valjean, takes him to the jail. Jean Valjean immediately escapes because that's all he's been doing his entire time as a criminal.
Mm-hmm.
He's escaping every couple of months.
Right.
He immediately escapes. He'd also left his like housemaid with certain like I don't know, like rules or whatever to like, or orders to like take his money out of the bank and to have it ready for him in like the form of banknotes.
Mm-hmm.
And so he takes these banknotes, he goes all the way to the town where Cosette's being held, and he plants the notes there. He hides them in a place. And then he gets arrested again outside of the town because he knew that the cops are after him. Mm-hmm. So he just basically takes his money, hides it there. He wanted to go save Cosette, but I think he like got caught before he could.
Mm-hmm.
They throw him back in jail, and then that's the start of book 2, Cosette. We're already at our time, so I'm going to try to make this one a lot quicker.
Okay.
In book 2, so yeah, and also Fantine did die at the end of book 1.
Surprise.
Yeah.
Spoilers.
Spoilers. The girl who died in the movie fairly early dies fairly early in the book as well.
Yeah.
So book 2, Jean Valjean starts as a slave on the ship. Actually, no, book 2 starts with a historical segment of Victor Hugo walking through the old battlefield and describing it in detail.
That's why I couldn't read these books.
But that's why the abridged copy, that's why I will always recommend the abridged one for this.
But does this have like the super long section about the sewers?
No, it has one paragraph in italics describing Victor Hugo's paragraph about the sewer, or
chapters about the sewers.
Yeah, endless chapters about the sewers. So the whole part of the first part is just to introduce that Thénardier robbed a colonel on the battlefield. He stole all his stuff, and then while he was robbing the colonel, he like the shaking of him like basically like woke him up from like a stupor. And the colonel's like, "Oh, you saved my life." And then the Thénardier's like, yeah, that was me. I was out here just saving your life." And the colonel's like, "Oh, I'd give you some money, but my purse appears to be missing." And the colonel, Thénardier's like, "Just get it to me later when you have it." And so Thénardier is like a war hero because he saved this colonel, but really he was a grave robber.
Yeah.
So that's what Thénardier like. It gets his initial little bit of fame. Little bit of money. He opens this inn in a small town. It doesn't go well. He ends up owing a lot of money all the time. The wife is like, she's described as like an ogress. Like, yeah.
Not Helena Bonham Carter.
No, she's like really big and really mean.
Okay.
And I think at one point in the musical, Helena Bonham Carter yells at Cosette, but in the book, she's like relentlessly beating Cosette. So there's a slight difference.
Yeah, in the movie, because that's like, I'm scared of the woods, and Helena Bonham Carter's like, go get water out of the woods.
Yeah.
And that's like the worst bit.
Yeah, and that happens in the book too.
Okay.
But that's, she is beaten relentlessly by Madame Thénardier, who, it's like described that Madame Thénardier only had enough love for her husband and her first 2 kids, and views Cosette as competition to her kids and hates her, and views her other kids as nothing.
Okay.
So,
right.
She's a really good character. Thénardier is just like he's like a jackal. He's just like, I don't know, like a scavenger, and he wants money, and he'll do anything for money, and he doesn't care. And he's pretty cutthroat. So that's kind of their introduction. It goes to Jean Valjean. He is back at the boats. A workman. So they get convicts to haul in the boats, and then they have like actual workmen like working on the boats.
Right.
And then like an actual workman falls into the ocean. And then Jean Valjean's like, somebody has to go save him. And then nobody will. And they're like, oh, we're getting a crew together. He's like, no, you have to go save him now. And then he's like, here, undo this chain. Let me go save him. If I die out there, it's just a convict. It's not a problem. And they're like, okay, that makes sense. So he saves the guy, but like basically he like dives in. Or no. He saves the guy off the top rigging because the guy's like stuck up top.
Mm-hmm.
And then he lowers the guy down. And then after lowering the guy down, then, oh no, all of a sudden this convict falls into the ocean. And of course it's just Jean Valjean escaping again.
Yeah, dives into the ocean.
Yeah, he dives, he's fine. And Victor Hugo does this thing where he'll never say it's Jean Valjean. He always like tries to disguise it as like, ooh, another convict did this. And then like 2 pages later being like, it was Jean Valjean. I know I tricked you guys, but it is the main character of this book.
Surprise!
Yeah, he does that so much. So then it cuts to Cosette's now like 8 years old. She's just a slave. It says that Fantine had stopped sending money for 6 months, so I'm guessing it's 6 months after Fantine died.
Mm-hmm.
Cosette is... One night, it's Christmas Eve. They need more water from the inn, and the only place to get water in this town is a well. That's like a 15-minute walk outside of town. Yeah. It's specified that everyone in town gets their water before nightfall because it's like walking in the woods for 15 minutes in pitch dark.
Mm-hmm.
But the Thénardiers didn't have enough water, so they send Cosette out to do it. They threaten to beat her up and all that stuff. She ends up going. And Madame Thénardier also gives her a 15 sou coin to buy bread on the way home. Cosette is like walking and she's getting terrified and she wants to turn back. Also, I don't think she has shoes because they don't give her like anything.
Mm-hmm.
She's wearing like rags and doesn't have shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Or she has wooden shoes or something.
Okay.
She gets to the spot where like the last lights are in town, like the last like street lights or whatever they had back then. And she's like, I don't want to go any further. I'm too scared of the dark. But then she's like, but I have to go or else this lady's going to beat me. So then she decides to go anyway. Gets there. She's super scared. It's actually like, this is one of the most heart-wrenching parts of the book for me, is like this little kid is like terrified and doesn't want to be there. She gets the bucket full of water and then it's too heavy for her to carry.
Mm-hmm.
But she's like, I can't just leave it here or else I'm going to get beaten. But I'm not strong enough to carry it. She's like picking it up and dragging it like 2 steps before she has to like set it down again.
Mm-hmm.
And like, she's like so scared out of her mind because it's like completely dark around her. She's in the middle of the woods. But if she goes back, she's going to get beaten. And she's just like, totally doesn't know what to do. And then just this random strong hand lifts the bucket and starts carrying it for her. And she's like so shocked she doesn't want to look at this guy. And in the movie, they have the worst song for this moment. Because he's like, what does he say? Like,
hush, child, don't be afraid of me.
Yeah. He's like,
tell me where you live.
Tell me where you live. That's the line. So, yeah. But anyway, so in the book, it's like much more heart-wrenching and much more emotional. And also, like, Jean Valjean feels like an actual, like, angel, like, guardian angel coming to protect her. And less like a creepy man who's meeting her in the woods and asking where she lives.
Don't cry. Don't be afraid of me. Tell me where you live. Is the weirdest way to introduce yourself to a child.
In the middle of the forest.
In the middle of the forest. In the middle of the night.
Yep. That's our hero. But no, in the book it's a little more, it feels a little more natural. And also, it's really told from Cosette's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, in her mind, like, this is just like a hero who came to save her.
Yeah.
So she's not really talking to him. She's too, like, shocked by him. They get back to the inn. the Madame Thénardier wants to like tear a strip off Cosette, but then she sees there's this like man there who wants to rent a room, so she won't yell at Cosette in front of the man. There's this whole scene where they're arguing, like where Thénardier and his wife are both arguing about whether the guy's rich or not, because he's wearing a yellow jacket, which means he's poor, but he's willing to spend money on the child, which must mean he's rich. And they're just like arguing back and forth.
Yeah. They sound a lot less fun than in the movies.
No, they're like hardcore villains in the book. And in the movies, they're comic relief.
Singing Master of the House and just like pulling people's hats off their heads without them noticing. And
yeah, in the movie, they're like comically robbing people and like peeing in the wine jugs and stuff.
Yeah, they're comic relief characters in the movie.
In the book, they're like, okay, how can we steal every cent from everyone who's here? And also, I'm going to murder this child.
Legitimate villains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're doing their villain thing. Cosette is... Oh, she drops the coin at some point. And then Madame Thénardier's like, where's my bread? And she's like, I don't have the bread. The place was closed. It's like, okay, give me my coin back. And then she's like, oh, I can't find it. And then she starts crying, and Madame Thénardier's about to beat her. And then Jean Valjean rolls up and is like, oh, is this the coin that you dropped? And it was like a franc instead of a 15 sous. Mm-hmm. And then so Madame Thénardier's like, yes, that was the coin. Thank you very much. I guess this child dropped it. Don't do it again. But it's like, she knew it wasn't the coin, but she was just like, she's making money, so she didn't care.
Yeah.
Then the girls, Eponine and Azelma, are playing with their dolls, but Cosette's never given a doll, so she's playing with like rags. Yeah. And on a stick. No, a lead sword, that's what it is. She's got a tiny little knife and rags, and she's dressing it up like a doll. And then Jean Valjean like goes next door, and there's like a toy store where everyone was like admiring this really fancy doll. So he buys the doll and gives it to Cosette, and then that's when they're like, okay, this guy's definitely rich. And then the other little girls are like super jealous of Cosette, and it's like a whole thing. Mm-hmm. He ends up like sleeping downstairs because at first they tell him they have no room because they think he's poor, but then he's like, oh, I'm willing to pay, and then they're like, okay, well, we're gonna charge you a lot. And he's like, and also you have to sleep in this chair. And then he's like, okay. And then next thing you know, Thénardier is like offering him the bridal suite, and then he's like, I would have been happy sleeping in the stable. I don't want this. And then he's like, oh, but you simply must, like trying to get more money out of him.
Yeah.
Because it's Christmas, all the girls had their stockings out on the fireplace, and they all had money in them except for Cosette. So then Jean Valjean, of course, slips like a gold coin in there, which was worth like 5 francs or something.
Yeah.
And a gold crown. I don't know how much that's worth. And so, they're all like, oh, they're getting mad at this guy, like going around flaunting his wealth. They make this plan to like basically rob him blind. Instead of charging 30 sous for the room, they're charging him 30 francs. Mm-hmm. And then he's like, so they give him the bill, and he's like, this is outrageous. I don't want to pay it. But then he's like, he hears that Madame Thénardier is wanting to get rid of Cosette because she's simply too much burden on them. And he's like, oh, I'll take the child. Because that was kind of his goal anyway, was to save Cosette. Mm-hmm. And then she's like, oh, okay, well, pay for your room, and then you can have the child. And then Mr. Thénardier runs up and is like, oh, you fool, you absolute buffoon, you gave him the wrong bill. And then so he gives him a bill for 30 sous, and is like, here you go. But I couldn't possibly part with Cosette. And like, that's one of my favorite parts of the movie is when they're doing that song, like, my dear little Colette Cosette.
Yeah, that's good, yeah.
So they kind of have that scene, but it's more like Thénardier is the one, and Madame Thénardier is just like standing back, like kind of flabbergasted.
Yeah.
He ends up, so Thénardier owes like 1,500 to all his like debtors or whatever, and so, or his lenders. So he asked for that much for Cosette. So Jean Valjean's basically like, sure, ask no questions and I'll give you 1,500. Gives her money for the kid, takes Cosette, starts leaving, and then as he's leaving, he tells his wife, or Thénardier tells his wife how much money he made, and the wife is like, you idiot, you could have got way more than that. The guy's rich. And then he's like, oh, you're right. So then Thénardier runs into the woods trying to find them. And he's like, this is the part where like, so throughout the book, Javert, Jean Valjean, and Thénardier are all described as tigers who are like hunting people. But like Jean Valjean obviously becomes a good guy, so he stops. It's like only when he's like calling on his powers as a convict does he become a tiger again. But this is the part where Thénardier is a tiger. He's like hunting them in the woods, and he starts asking for more money for Jean Valjean, and he's like, I know that you're trying to steal this child. 1,500 is not enough. I want 3,000 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's like, unless you have papers proving that you are the, like, that this child belongs to you. And then he pulls out the paper that Fantine had given him earlier that said, I want you to retrieve my child from the Thénardiers. He's like, here, technically I didn't have to give you anything because I have the rightful guardianship of this child. And then Thénardier is like so mad because he was basically bested.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so then they start leaving and Thénardier keeps following him. And then Jean Valjean, like, tries to lose him in the forest and Thénardier keeps, like, on his heels. And then I think Jean Valjean, like, threatens him, or, like, he picks up his walking stick, which is, like, a club, and, like, holds it in a threatening way, and then Thénardier decides, you know what, I followed them long enough. So he goes home. Jean Valjean takes Cosette to live in a little apartment in, like, a secluded area of, like, the outskirts of Paris. They're, like, it's, like, they describe, so in the first half with the bishop, Jean Valjean is, like, described as discovering, like, faith. And then this part is, like, him described as, like, discovering love. Like, he's got the love of, like, a parent for a child.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently, according to the very helpful, like, page notes at the bottom, Victor Hugo was, like, apparently, like, a very loving grandfather and was, like, obsessed with his grandkids. So, like, he puts a bit of that into Jean Valjean. And Jean Valjean, like, loves Cosette. He's taking care of her really well. He feels really bad for her because she's been abused her whole life. And then he's, like, basically his whole life is, like, he's living with Cosette in this apartment. They go for walks in the evening time when, like, there's less chance of him being spotted.
Mm-hmm.
But then his, like, talkative, his gossipy landlord starts, like, spreading rumors about this rich guy who only leaves at night and blah, blah, blah. And then Javert is, like, he thinks that Jean Valjean is dead, but he's heard of this, like, this weird guy in this section of town that sounds suspicious. So he goes posing as, like, a beggar,
mm-hmm.
and just to see if he can spot this, like, weird so-called, like, rich guy who nobody knows where he got his money from. And then when he sees him, he's like, oh, I'm pretty sure that's Jean Valjean, but Jean Valjean's dead. So he's like, so I want to find out more. And then Jean Valjean also spots Javert when that happens. And then it's like, okay, we need to get going because Javert is back on my tail. Jean Valjean is hiding in his apartment when one night he hears, like, walking through the building, like one of the other rooms has been rented or something.
Right.
And before it was, like, the building was totally empty. And he thinks that it's Javert, like, spying on him, and guess what it is. So he, like, hides in his whole room that night, doesn't make a sound. And then Javert goes and talks to the landlady and finds out more about this so-called rich guy. And Jean Valjean basically, like, gets all his money together, hides it in his jacket. He, like, sews the money hidden into the jacket. Cosette, he's like, grab all your stuff, we're leaving. They, like, start leaving through the night. Some, like, men are following them around, and he's pretty sure that it's the cops. Eventually, he sees that Javert is with them, and is like, okay, we need to get out of here now. There's a whole section of them, like, dodging little streets and, like, crossing over bridges and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, he's, like, backed into a corner, and this is where the wall climbing thing happens. But he can't climb a wall while holding a child, so he doesn't know what to do. So then he cuts a rope off a lamp nearby, like a street lamp.
Yeah.
And then, because they needed ropes to, like, lower the lamp to light them. So he cuts the rope, he ties the rope around Cosette's waist, and then he scales the wall, and then just basically, like, drags her up with the rope. They end up inside of a convent where men aren't allowed in, it's only nuns. But the gardener there just so happens to be Mr. Fauchelevent.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's kind of like...
Surprise.
Some divine authorship there. Yeah, so then they make this whole scheme to get Jean Valjean into the convent legitimately, because that way he can work as a gardener alongside Fauchelevent.
Mm-hmm.
But he can't just appear in a convent, so he has to, like, basically escape the convent and then come back in. And they come up with this whole convoluted scheme of, like, hiding a body in a coffin, and then he would be in the coffin. And then when they get to the graveyard, then he could escape. And, like, it's very convoluted just to get to Jean Valjean's in the convent. Cosette is now, like, in training kind of to be a nun, like she's being educated. And him and Fauchelevent are working together. Javert is super mad because he knew he had Jean Valjean. He slipped away. And yeah, that's where book 2 ends.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's like, other than the convent stuff, most of it's in the musical or the movie.
Yep.
But then the next part is like none of it's in the movie.
This midsection here?
Yeah, the midsection is like Marius. The next book is Marius.
Okay.
And it's about like who Marius is, how he was like raised by his grandfather and stuff.
Yeah.
Then there's the whole section of like when Marius and Cosette first meet. Like in the movie, they meet once and they're like instantly in love.
Yeah.
In the book, they're like friends for a while and they're going for like walks together and stuff.
Okay.
And then the stuff from the movie starts happening with Eponine and stuff. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the first half of Les Mis. I love this book. It's very emotional. I've only cried at one part so far in this reading, and that is when little Cosette was like being beaten, and then Jean Valjean like shows up to save her. Mm-hmm. In the movie, I think I cried at "I Dreamed a Dream" is usually the part that I cry at.
That usually gets people.
It's a really good song.
Yeah.
And it's like if you listen to the lyrics, it's very emotional.
Yeah, that's usually a big punch.
Yeah. And the ending will make me like
the ending
weep.
gets me every time.
The ending will probably make me
Every
weep
time.
when I talk about it on here. I can't wait. But anyway, we're way over time.
Yeah.
Danny, where can people find us?
People can find us on Facebook, Literary AF. We're on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and Podbean, Literary AF. And you can find us on... Actually, no, I guess you can Gmail us at literaryafpod@gmail.com.
Right. And yeah, so tune in next week. I don't know if I'll have the second part read by then, but it might be Les Mis Part 2.
It might be Les Mis Part 2. Otherwise, I'll have something going for sure.
Yeah.
We'll figure something out.
We'll figure something out.
Because, yeah, you still have like a half a book to go.
Oh, that's only 540 pages. That's not bad.
When did you start the first half?
Beginning of December. So if I read twice as fast as I've been reading so far.
Yeah, you'd have to push it.
Yeah, so we'll see.
We'll see. I'll have something if you're not ready for Les Mis. It'll be good.
All right. Okay, thanks for listening and catch us next time.
Bye.
Bye.